On this episode of the podcast, Todd interviews James FitzGerald of OPEX. For more information about OPEX, you can check out their website at opexfit.com.
All right, guys, this is Todd Nee from South Loop Strength and Conditioning, and I'm here with James FitzGerald, a.k.a. OPT, a.k.a. Mr. OPEX, and I think at one point your YouTube name was OOPPTT, which I thought was actually
I like
really
Mr.
funny.
OPEX. That's a new one, Todd.
Yeah,
I really like that.
It's kind of like, I don't know, sort of like Doctor Strange, Mr. OPEX. Something like that. It has a little bit of like a superhero villain resonance to that, so I think you could go with that.
Yeah,
I think you could go with that. But yeah, James has taken the time to chat with us a little bit today. There's going to be a course coming up at South Loop Strength and Conditioning, my gym, where James is going to be teaching program design. So we figured we'd get him on the podcast and kind of go down a bunch of different rabbit holes on program design, his background, running a business, all that type of stuff. So James, thanks for taking the time to hang out with us today.
Yeah, always, man. I always look forward to chatting with former athletes and coaches like yourself and people that are trying to figure out these complex things in fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most people who are listening to this probably at least have some idea of your background just based upon either being involved in the CrossFit community or being potentially members at our gym, where we sort of advocate a lot of the stuff that you guys teach through OPEX and the CCP. But one of the things I think is really interesting that I know you've sort of given your background a bunch of times. Like I had the university education. I originally was a CrossFit competitor, just kind of following the main site, and then started to sort of synthesize the things you knew about strength and conditioning into the new model sort of presented by CrossFit. But just sort of talking to you on the back end a little bit, I know you have experience working with Charles Poliquin, with Paul Chek, and a bunch of other, maniacs like that. Can you kind of go down a little bit more detail in terms of what your experiences were with those folks and what you learned from them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could summarize what I've learned with them, because it's a monstrosity of information, as well as just deep gratitude for, how really those guys, who the two you mentioned, and there was many others, but we'll just use the two as examples because there could be a list of other people. But, they were crazy, and they were vilified, and they were honestly recluses, and they were, dickheads to a lot of really people in the industry. But as a coach, they said the shit that no one wanted to hear. And so I'm listening to that information, and I really just thought that a lot of stuff they had to share was, magical. If there's two things that those two gentlemen, just to give you an example, you could, bring it down to a small level. Charles was, I think, probably the master thus far in reps and sets and tempo and all the intricacies that go around, absolute strength development. I think he had that shit dialed in terms of the dose response, the endocrine response, the kind of training, the setup, the programming, and how you can affect people truly. And I think Paul, brought the whole idea of functional fitness to the forefront. Like, it wasn't what you see functional fitness as today. Paul was the one who said machines are going to kill you, like they'll cause cancer. And we were like, yeah, that's exactly right. Because we had these keys called dumbbells and free weights and like body movement activities where we were like, this shit is really going to help people, right? Because that's what real life is. So he was the forefather in that, and I was the initial guy. Yeah, that followed these guys around on those weekends and chased them around the globe, basically, just to listen to their same message all the time. But they had some real big influences on me. Ian King was another coach that had a massive influence for me. He was kind of like the nicer Charles Poliquin, I guess you could say, different version of it. In Australia, with his attitude, it certainly, went a long ways. I think, without saying Louis Simmons, more so Dave Tate. Dave Tate was a role model in different ways for me in terms of learning the systems and designs around the West Side method. You just think about it, if you could just pull all those things together from those four people in general, I think you're going to have you're going to stand on the shoulders of giants and have a pretty good idea around fitness in general, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one thing that's interesting is you sort of mentioned this where they had these cults of personality surrounding them, particularly, Poliquin and Czech and to some degree Simmons as well, where they, have this kind of guru, I guess, image that is probably partially put upon them and partially created by themselves. But sort of you seeing them on the back end, how did they actually create these systems that they're utilizing? What did they use to take in information, and how did they systematize it?
Yeah, well, they all had different ways. They were the thing about all four of them, and there's probably 8 to 10, I'd say, but all of them were really well researched. So these weren't people that just pulled shit out of their ass. They were actually well researched, well written. It's not unknown. As an example, that Poliquin knew like 6 or 7 languages and would read through all the journals that people couldn't get through just due to the languages that he learned. So he would do things like that just to learn about interesting methods of lifting and design. I mean, if you're going to go to that length, you're certainly going to know how to make things work. Now, to answer how people operated their system, not to sound like it being, you used the word cult, I didn't, but you just drink the Kool-Aid. Honestly, like Charles used fear, honestly. In terms of methods to get information across, Paul would use incompetency, right? So he would make you feel like you're dumb if you didn't know this shit or if you weren't practicing it. Kind of like we're over here, we're elitist and we know this, and everyone else is dumb and needs to basically learn how to drink the right amount of water filtered per day. and Louis would be the same way, but he just used it through just hard work, but also like being adamant that his shit worked. Now, he would say this shit works for everything. So you got to admire people that really believe in their system like that. And Ian King would be, I guess, kind of adamant militant, way of doing it, where it's like, no, this is the way it's done, and that's the highway. So how did these guys, develop those systems and put them to the market? It's just through influence, and influencing people can come in multiple different forms. Just like CrossFit did it a different way too, through media and a cult, following.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's really interesting that you've done has been taking a lot of these concepts from strength and conditioning outside of CrossFit and trying to figure out what's going on within CrossFit based upon other models. Right, that's one of the things that when I first came across your material, it resonated with me because I'd been reading on my own some like weird Russian manuals and being like, oh, there has to be some sort of connection. I was like, oh man, like these guys already did all this stuff. Okay, cool. I should just listen to what they have to say. So on your end, how do you figure out what works and figure out what doesn't work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be completely honest, I don't think my work will ever, like what I consider my work and my legacy, I don't think in my lifetime it will be accomplished. So how do I know what works for what I do and how I do it? I think I'll die before someone figures that out, to be completely honest, because the way I see it is that there was this massive movement in this investigation into fitness, which started in like the 80s and early 90s. And I was just very fortunate to be around for these people who started that concept of like, you probably should know what you're doing when you do exercise. And so they started that idea. And I, at the time, with the spawning of CrossFit, it's just that I was born in 74 and I was 30 years of age and I had a career and I had a background in kinesiology and movement. And I could see things that other people couldn't see within CrossFit as being I saw it as like a glue that connected all of these things that could be a new version of fitness. And now, as you're seeing, it's just a proliferation of these multiple versions and models, really, of what we spawned back in the the early 2000s, really, of this new age, fitness. So I've just been like one of the first individuals that kind of combined a bunch of things and said, these are the principles that you see within all of them, so that coaches and people could see it and go, that kind of makes sense. But to be honest, I think it'll take, 30, 50 years, if we're still around, based upon your versions of singularity, for some of these concepts to come to light. So I could say, this definitely works.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess on an even more granular level of something like that, I mean, one of the big things that I think you've brought to people is actually having an understanding of energy systems training. right? Like saying, okay, cool, we want to attempt to train this system within the body. Maybe we don't know exactly what dose response we're getting, but we can at least attempt to get something resembling, predominantly aerobic work out of the session or predominantly lactate work out of the session. So let's say, for example, that you're trying to work on models for training lactate endurance.
Yeah.
Right? How do you originally come up with these models and say, okay, cool, here's what track and field does, and I want my mixed modal fitness to elicit a similar response? What does building that model look like for you?
Yeah. So first of all, you gotta, well, like Todd, but I'll explain to your audience. You have to know the client first. The client always dictates what you're trying to do. So the second thing you need to come up with is really a template and a mechanical design that would indicate with work and rest that it actually is the energy system that you're trying to work. So there are physiological principles. If the athlete is correct, meaning that you've chosen the right human to try to do this, meaning that they actually can do the work that's prescribed, and that gets kind of complicated, but let's just say it's the athlete is chosen, and you do the right intensity and you do the right time frame, then the work and rest and the client should dictate the dose response of the work that's being done. So, with people, really what the academic model got wrong is they truly looked at it from an endurance lens and said, the way that you make people better in fitness or in function is to figure out what the limitations are in the endurance curve. What they forgot to recognize that there's multiple different pieces and fingerprints underneath that curve, and it's not just through the endurance lens that dictates what kind of work people are doing. And if anything happened that totally fucked that up was CrossFit, because they said you could do thrusters and pull-ups in 2 minutes and get into a complete lactic bath. And it's still, how long is it? 15 years later, and academia still doesn't know what the fuck is going on when people do that. They're like, no, it's muscle endurance because it's and they just stop talking because they can't explain it. And so if you know the client, the rest time which required before they do it again, it kind of allows you to understand if it's aerobic or anaerobic. A simple example, Todd, would be, let's just say you take monostructural work like rowing, you do 2 minutes of work, and you give someone 2 minutes of rest, no matter how work they do, and you give them 2 minutes of rest, they do another 2 minutes of work, and it's the exact same piece of work that they did, and then they recover again in 2 minutes and do another 2 minutes of work, and they recover again, they do another 2 minutes of work, and it's all the same score. I don't care how hard or how easy it is, it's called aerobic. Now, if you want to do lactic endurance monostructurally, as I would say, for 2 minutes, you should barely last more than 2 minutes. That's the pace that dictates it being truly more anaerobic for that period of time. So you should say to yourself, whatever pace I'm choosing, when I get close to 2 minutes, my brain should say, thank God, because you can't do even 20 more seconds of what you just tried. So obviously the pace is higher, the dose response is different, and now that requires a certain period of rest. And through my own work, plus what I saw through annals of energy system training prior to me from these people and experts really in the field, largely through track and field rowing and endurance protocols, you should take 8 to 15 minutes to recover from that piece of work. And so that's how you dictate, what that is. I'm sorry it was a long answer, but obviously with energy system training, it's quite complex.
Sure. No, I think that's very interesting. The part of coaching is not just knowing the X's and O's and the rest and work prescription, but saying what are you as the athlete potentially feeling based upon what I'm giving you.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Because the person dictates that, right? The person comes in and you're like, oh, now I've learned this new lactic endurance protocol. We're going to work for 2 minutes and rest for 12, and they're trying their damnedest to become anaerobic in 2 minutes. But like you and I know, if you can't actually activate muscle endurance past 30 seconds, and you can't basically have enough power to allow yourself to get the contractions with the O2 exchange rate within 2 minutes, it's not aerobic. It becomes it's not anaerobic. It becomes an aerobic activity because they basically just are like jumping up against the wall and trying to get over it, but they can't. But that doesn't make it hard,
Yeah, for sure. And I think another question that comes up when you're starting to deal with these, this repeatability concept is what is the actual fatigue limitation, right? Is it going to be a more, cellular level of fatigue in terms of like you have too much acid in your muscle and it can't contract? Or is there something in the brain that's starting to say, hey, listen, if you keep this up, you're going to screw up your blood pH and die? Like, how do you figure out what is actually limiting people when they're trying to train or compete?
Yeah, well, I have a model, a theory that I teach in level 2 assessment based upon that, and it's just a model in itself because, well, why not? I see things that were, again, CrossFit screwed this up, but also created a massive enlightenment into that limitation model because the couple of things you mentioned are true, and there's a number of other things, and I really don't think, and even I asked, some of my colleagues in the field who taught me, and these guys are experts in muscle fatigue, they'll tell you that they really don't understand fatigue yet, and because it's a complex situation. And I think although Tim Noakes created a really good idea, it allows us certainly to have a base support to say, okay, that kind of makes sense. Your survival mechanisms are there, and your brain is doing this, and it's controlling all that. Yeah, I get that. But when you add multiple different things into 3 minutes of work, where CrossFit comes in, i.e., and and people get quote unquote tired, there's a lot of shit I can tell you going on besides the brain that makes people get tired in that situation. Sure, it's maybe the downstream effect of that. So when someone does exercise and I watch them, I have to think in my head, there's a number of things that are causing that fatigue. And then what you really want to work on is just the highest order of that. So you got to say to yourself, as a coach, what's your gut instinct after you have this base supportive knowledge of these limiters? What's your gut instinct that says this is the limiter? And then you go back to a non-fatigue state and you should try to work on those limitations and then try to build it up to a threshold state and then come back to that exact same test and see if it's improved. And then it's a feedback system. And then, of course, you can see that you made some adjustments based upon it.
Yeah, for sure. And then based upon all that stuff, one of your claims to fame, other than, being an athlete yourself, is coaching a lot of top tier CrossFit athletes, which to coaches and, sort of everyday fitness people is fascinating. It's like, who are these people? What are they doing? How do they do it? Maybe I just want to come to the gym 3 times a week, but I want to sort of stand in awe of the fitness that can be accomplished. What separates the best of the best from the next tier, from the normal person?
Yeah, well, I don't have one answer for that, but I'm certainly, it does get me out of bed every day. I'll tell you that. So I'm really, at the current point in time, I'm really keenly interested in genetics, and obviously that is, if you thought of a wormhole, I'm so, just in layman's terms, I'm so dumb in terms of human genetics that it almost seems, almost scary is the way I say it. Like there's so many things that are going on underneath that. But there are some companies, DNA Fit being one of them, and there's other ones, Athletagen and 23andMe are, trying to get together to create information. So we could even look at what are these things that are going on. Like more recently, Todd, I can send this over if you want to link it for the podcast, but this guy who's working with DNA Fit, this researcher, Amitov, has just discovered these real obvious, 3 different responding genetic codes within elite endurance athletes. So there's non-responders, there's moderate responders, and then there's high responders. And I think it goes hand in hand in what you and I see, Todd, like with day-to-day fitness also possibly, is that there's some people that just are slow at adapting. And then there's some people that are moderate at adaptation, and there's some people that are fast adapters. And I think to answer your question on what separates the highest level people, those are the ones that adapt the fastest. And the words that I use, which, I'm, I guess you could say, known for saying because philosophically I believe it is one word, it's called resilience. So it's the ability for someone to adapt to some kind of stress as an organism in the environment, and then they will adapt fastest, even like Rich Froning adapts in seconds. So give you an idea, for Rich Froning can adapt in seconds, it could take someone years to adapt to what he does in seconds. And that shows you the difference between, someone doing a piece of work for 12 minutes and him doing it in 5.5. And that's what I think that's the main thing. You can add all other kinds of things, which kind of makes sense, right? Like probably has, mitochondria of a fucking buffalo. He probably has, the joint proprioceptors that are best seen in, the Greco-Roman wrestlers from hundreds of years ago. He probably has all those things in place, but there is one thing that certainly separates them, and I believe it's that resilience factor.
Sure. So the resilience basically allows them to almost any volume of stress heaped upon them that they actually adapt that stress positively rather than negatively.
Yeah, and I
more
think
quickly than others as well.
Yeah, and I think it's even at a cellular and organ level also. I mean, we see even some preliminary tests of looking under the hood, like you may have done, Todd, but to be able to look at just basic things of an adrenal stress index profile or a post-exercise stress tolerance test, or even secretory IgA it measures, or melatonin at night, or things like this. These athletes are presenting almost dead, like they're just hanging on under what's considered general health measures, and you got to say to yourself, if they're in a hypogonadal state and they're, looks like they just came out of war for 5 years, how are they doing this? And the way they're doing it is that they're finding a way, and that's called resilience,
Sure. And then on a more, I guess, training level too, one of the things I learned from you and your brother has a lot to do with fatigue repeatability. Right?
Yeah.
That it's not just the amount of work that these folks can do if you have them do one thing, it's that they can very quickly and turn around and do it again. Can you just elaborate on what you think may be going on there and how you sort of came across this concept in the first place?
Oh man, yeah, that's an awesome one. And I really think, just to make sense of it, because there's so much energy and information that's put into how people do work and who does the best work. And what really separates people, my belief is, and my brother obviously backs me up on that from our conversations and debates based upon it, is that it's not about the work that's done, but it's the ability for people to do work over and over that dictates all those measures of resilience and really high levels of fitness. So, the testing of it really came about with my, I guess you could call it, I called it the creative years. That was like 2010 when I started doing the CCP. I had at that point in time coached, hundreds of very successful CrossFitters to get better at the sport. I participated in the games for a number of years then. I had developed 4 really successful personal training or corporate or personal training with physical therapy businesses, 2 CrossFits. And there was a point where I was like, okay, I gotta put some shit together as to what made this successful and how I do it. So I really started to do, Todd, is just take some extra time during the days to come up with the CCP. And then I took, I think it was like 6 months to write out what I believed was visions of, what my definition was of fitness. And of course, along all this, research and looking back on what created the best in people, I looked back on intervals that I had done with individuals and really saw this, shit, gleaming off the paper of what was important in terms of measures of fitness. And then, sure as shit, it was done in multiple sport settings. And I know for someone that's close by, the Canadian Olympic Organization had done it for multiple years with a sprint repeat test. It was well known within the European elite sprint cycling testing that they would do these 60-second protocols, 2 or 3 times, which they would just describe as, just death. That's the way they describe it. It's like, guys would put, signs on their bikes, written signs on their bikes during the test that says, "Fuck you, legs." So it'd just be like the worst experience possible. And of course I looked at that and I was like, so what are they trying to do by testing that? And sure as shit, you go back and see that what they're trying to do is to get a definition of how anaerobic they are versus aerobic. So what repeat fatigability does, or fatigue repeatability testing does, it just gives you insight and a litmus test into how currently things are operating. And to make it sound really simple for most people, just imagine you were to do 30 seconds of a really hard piece of effort, really hard, no matter what, really hard piece of effort, you rest 30 seconds, and you do that again, guns a-blazing. And then you rest 30 seconds, and then you go again. So if you should be able to understand that, you cannot recover in 30 seconds to do that exact same piece of work. So the question remains, what is causing you to not be able to do that second piece of work? And so it opens up all these windows into, are you not powerful enough? Are you not aerobic enough to recover? Do you not have the correct kind of training in place? Have you not practiced, breath and recovery, yada, yada, yada. So it just opens up massive insight, Todd, by, doing repeat efforts. And ironically, especially even within the best CrossFitters out there, they train like that. They call it intervals because they just don't know any better. But they do these repeat intervals over and over as hard as possible, and they actually have no attrition. It's because they're just becoming so aerobic at that muscle endurance level.
Yeah, and if you speak to them, they'll say, "Oh my God, I was dying. I was going as hard as I could. That was all out. I thought I was gonna fall apart." And but you look at their numbers on it, and it's insane. It's just like you actually just did the exact same thing every time. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
Like, what is going on inside of your body that enables you to think you're pushing that hard, but just actually be just nailing it every single time? Maybe a little bit of attrition, but not too much.
I know.
Yeah. So based upon that, then you've mentioned the concept of dampening as well. Is that something that you think is relevant there?
Yeah, for sure. Because let's just say someone needs to improve their ability to do repeat performances. So some people say, okay, because I have lots of arguments, I'm vilified for some of my comments and whatnot, but I don't give a shit. I believe what I believe. But I think like little tests like the kettlebell swing row burpee test, which is basically 3 minutes of bullshit and then 12 minutes of rest, do it 3 times, or a row 30-30 times 4, I can look at those kind of tests and tell you how someone's going to do on a weekend competition. Because in a weekend competition like the regionals, you'll have 2 or 3 pieces on Friday, 2 or 3 on Saturday, 2 or 3 on Sunday. And I think you can get little insights into those repeat tests that can tell someone if they're too powerful, like your comment of dampening. So, what we mean by dampening is that let's just say someone does those repeat efforts. Let's just say they go to the regionals, okay, like I did in 2012, and where I wasn't dampened. I was just happy to be there, but it's still a good example where I did Jackie and I did the best I could do. I still finished maybe top 15 out of 40 people at the event, but I did the best I could do. But after that event, I basically survived for the rest of the weekend. So as you can see, what would have been better for me is to actually go into Jackie being what we call dampened, which means that you don't have the opportunity to go deep into your nervous system so that you totally, F it all up and can't recover from it. So it's honestly a way of almost overreaching or overtraining just so you actually can't produce as much power as possible. And the word dampening has come up, more so due to the world of CrossFit, because why else would you want to be dampened? It actually makes no sense unless you're maybe, a mile racer or, a fighter or something like that. But otherwise you have to have like real high central nervous system stimulation. And the problem with that, though, of course, is you're really excited and you've got an opening event that's going to require you to pace a little bit and you're just like chewing bees. You're just going to blow up. And then, of course, you can't recover from it because you went too deep into the system. So that's what we call dampening, is a matter of just trying to get people into like this tone of the nervous system that allows them to be at the correct arousal state.
And you mentioned this concept of nervous system fatigue. What do you think is going on there? I know I've experienced this myself, and I see it in athletes, and it kind of just feels like you're just like, I'm toast. Like, I don't know. I just can't do anything. What do you think is actually happening in that case?
Yeah, I think it at an organ level, it definitely has something to do with your ability to be, I think, resistant to the cortisol process. So it's an electrical plus a metabolic thing that's going on. That's the way I describe it. Electrical meaning that I think your body has these downstream, effects that happen at the muscle level from the brain to the muscle, like in Tim Noakes' ideas, that the brain just over time, that electrical charge and that battery, which we call it, just starts to get, dysfunctional, I guess you could say, relative to how many times the battery had to turn on and off. At a secondary level, actually not secondary, at a similar level, what you're getting is a fight or flight response that's not as good. So when people need to activate that adrenaline, pathway, it really is going to take some deep, life-changing limit strength moment for them to actually activate the amount of cortisol that's required to do the piece of work. And we generally see it in, I guess you could say special forces, and you only really see it happening over and over when people cannot control the stress that's imposed upon them. Because in real life situations, like in CrossFit, you do not actually have to pick up the barbell. And what people, have a hard time doing over time is basically getting up enough cortisol just to go back and pick that barbell up again. And you combine that with some electricity issues that are going on in your system, and what you get is a really tired nerve system, meaning that the nerves just really get fried.
So it's just, even if you want to try to dig deep and go there, it's just not happening.
Nope, because you gotta, it's like an engine and a chassis. You're going to have to rebuild the chassis in order for that engine to stay in that car really, really good. And the way to rebuild the chassis, unfortunately, which is sometimes the case, though, people have to go into hormone replacement therapy, or cortisol supplementation, or thyroid desiccation supplementation, or they have to do something serious for their organs to get them back up and charged, and then to repair the gut at the same time, so your body can become anabolic and also rebuild. And then after that, you probably can get that electrical charge back up and going again.
Sure. Yeah, that's a deep, dark process for those who have been there.
Yep.
For those who have been there, I'm raising my hand right now.
Yeah, me too. At the same time, we put just our hand.
Yeah.
No one can see us.
Yeah, exactly. So we sort of went down a bunch of paths with actual, like, the nitty gritty of programming and fatigue and all that type of stuff. For you right now, what do you continue your own education in? Right. I mean, you've always been a learning person. What for you is a value around learning?
Yeah. What's a value around learning? Well, I'm not sure you meant to ask it in that way, but what's the value around learning? My God. Everything. I don't know. It just it makes me, it's a value for me for getting up in the morning. My big values are my training and my teaching and learning, I guess, at the back end of that. So it's a really high value for me. Where I am at the current time for it, I'm learning from multiple different levels. So I'm learning a lot about systems and fundamental systems, like going back to the basics of systems and how they work, and fundamental systematics, because that certainly helps me organize my thoughts, and it also helps me organize my business practices. And at the current time, I'm learning a lot about teaching and how to best get a massive message across to a really large audience that's really worthwhile and that means something to me. And then on, other levels, how I'm learning day to day, I'm definitely going down more, I guess, rabbit holes of self-learning, asking questions about DNA testing or genetic testing, staying on par with my doc and the learnings that we do together on, functional endocrinology, and staying in touch with Reed Davis on things like that too, as to what the current market is requiring, and all the things that go into that. And what I'm doing, maybe so I can just take a second, but also think about what I'm doing day to day. I'm providing content and creating content for coaches that want to go through our CCP program. I'm creating content for our website, so as public information for people to kind of see what we are and what we do. I'm educating our coaches. We have on-site as well as remote coaches that are here with us on-site. We have 12 coaches now that work in that program. And so per week, I'm educating those folks on aspects of program design and fitness and nutrition and life coaching and things like that. And then just reading the odd book, going through more recently finished up Grain Brain. I had started reading that, Dr. David Perlmutter, I think was his name. I started reading that a while back. So I just, have the odd book that I go through, maybe one every 10 days or so, 2 weeks.
That's impressive. That's impressive turnaround.
Yeah. Well, I take long shits, I take a long shit, take a crap, and I lengthen it out and get some good reading in. I've sped up my reading. And I carry it with me wherever I go. It's odd times during the day as well as morning time and night that I get a chance to do that. So,
Sure. So you mentioned systems. So like PlayStation, Nintendo 64. Sega CD. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. No. Yeah, stereo systems.
Yeah.
I got this big booming system for my kids. We dance. No, fundamental systematics. So organization and the all the background pieces that go into organization, and how systems. I mean, it's basically been my whole life. Like I've looked at systems of coaching, systems of design, systems of business, and I can look at those things and see why things work the way they do. And all I'm really trying to figure out now is to validate my own beliefs and thoughts. And when you understand systems, which is what Bernie Nowakowski taught me. I mean, his initial teaching to me was to honor systems and just to recognize they were there. And I was like, okay, I believe you. I recognize they're there. And now let me see what you're talking about. And now I'm at the point in my life where I'm starting to see all of it make sense, how things work together. And just trying to understand that has been a big learning for me.
Sure. And what has worked for you on your own personal end as far as systems like that?
I think, organizing my thoughts, really, because it allows you to really, just organize and orchestrate them in a way that is not energy deficient, and allows me to, put things together during the day for my calendar and my life and my month and my year that really just makes me fulfilled when I look day to day and look ahead in the future.
So it's more about figuring out how to organize your time relative to your priorities. Is that kind of what is a challenge for you right now?
Yeah, yep. That's one. That thing will always be a challenge, which is great. But having some concept of systems and how they work certainly allows me to do what I had mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with the education piece, right? You are teaching coaches through the CCP, and then also through your own OPEX coaches, right? That you sort of are a leader within that group in terms of teaching them how you do things, how they should continue to learn. What does that internal process look like for you guys? First of all, within OPEX, this is sort of a selfish question as well.
Yeah, no. So we have just in terms of structure. So we're besides three coaches. Now we have one in Chicago, one in Puerto Rico, one in UK, and one in Atlanta coming up. We have then 10 coaches that are on site. So we have 2 meetings per week. One meeting's 2 hours, and one meeting's an hour and a half. And we get together and we lay out ideas and hash out things that I basically lead the discussion on or discuss with our general manager, Mike Lee, on, what the current state of affair is. And within that process, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, but we just try to keep everyone up to breast on, expectations for the coaching delivery, what the business is involved in it, how we're creating systems, how we're creating data pulls, what kind of, testing we should do, what are some case studies, what are insights into best training practices. And then once a month, we have a full day of learning. So we'll go through maybe 6 to 8 hours, one day per month, where we just go head to toe on one big topic. More recent one we did was on nutrition for fitness athletes, as well as some functional endocrinology pieces. And then we had Jim Affermau come in, who's a clinical psychologist, and helped our coaches one day with that process. We had a PT who came in and taught us about some new levels of assessment that we could use in that process. We have Dick Tom, who's going to teach us about the female menses cycle and really dig into those kind of things for female athletes and some of the things we're seeing going on with that. So we really, I just try to create a good education platform for these coaches who want to be, the best remote coach possible. I mean, that's the job that they've chosen. They do a little bit of on-site training, but more of it is in a remote setting. And I just want to educate them to make sure that they're offering the best service possible to that competent client that's online. And so I don't know if that answers a little bit of your question as to what goes on inside of that process.
No, for sure. And then you mentioned that you've been learning effectively about learning.
Yeah.
What have you changed in terms of how you deliver information to people based upon that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think I would have probably a different answer for you every few months, but some of the things that are really highlighting to me over the past little while is really choosing words before they come out of my, like, it's so fascinating really that, we're I'm saying shit and there's something that's quickly going on from my brain and coming out through my mouth. And so I'm fascinated by that process. And so to answer your question though, I've been really careful on choosing my words and ensuring that I speak correctly with the right tone and with the right amount of words that are needed so that I don't have to go in circles to teach people. Does that make sense?
Sure. So rather than just kind of vomiting information and then having to sort it out after the fact, you want to be more deliberate in the message.
Yes, and I kind of did that for the first couple of years in my CCP coaching simply because it was like I needed a massive orgasm from all of this, information and stuff that I wanted to say. And so the first couple of years of CCP, everyone was like, whoa, man, back off a little bit. And now in our courses and our day-to-day practices with our coaches, I'm just really, to answer your question, really fine-tune that communication process.
Sure. And then with your own coaches, and then also with coaches who you work with through the CCP, have you found anything that effectively helps people learn to learn, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, Todd, that comes down to the basic, questions on, how much of a value learning is to them, really like laying out these questions on, because some people believe that because other people are learning, they're like, oh my God, I got to be learning. And really, they just may learn through a different way. So first of all, figuring out really if learning is an important thing for you. Secondly, to see that sometimes learning occurs in different ways. Sometimes people can do shit and learn stuff really well. Sometimes people can sit and read and learn things and retain it. And then, honestly, there's a lot of confusion. So people do all these different kinds of things, but they really don't learn anything. So they'll be signed up for, 10 different website notifications on news bulletins. But if you were to ask them, on day 2, after all those, so what's going on in the world today? They're like, I can't really tell you. So they think they're learning, but they're not retaining any information. So I think 2 things there. Figure out, first of all, if you actually value it and don't feel bad if you don't. And then secondly, understand that there's different ways to learn.
And for you personally, you've been obviously over the years learning a lot on coaching, more recently on teaching, on systematizing your own business, your life. What for you is the process that helps you actually learn, retain, implement, iterate? How does that actually work for you?
Yeah, I think that I've just like many people may have, I've kind of scoured everything to see what really sits with me. And now as I've aged, biologically as well as, I guess, mature level socially, I start to know, what allows me to retain information. And I've kind of go after things and try to learn about things that really, honestly, fulfill me. So I don't try to learn things, or I'm not invested in trying to learn stuff to fulfill other people. I learn stuff now so that when I'm reading it and I'm going through it, I'm really into it. Like I'm really involved. And so I guess I just have figured out the best way for me to learn, if that makes sense.
Sure. And how do you come to peace with wanting to do things that fulfill only you? Because I know for me, I'll experience discomfort if I have a bunch of podcasts that I haven't listened to. I'm like, I subscribed and I haven't listened. Like, this is stressing me out. Or like, oh man, I subscribed to this thing and I haven't looked at it yet. This is stressing me out. And I know that it's like almost silly that I'm like, I just want to consume information so badly, and then I get upset when I can't do it to the level that I want to, rather than actually just saying, what am I getting out of this, and what is my own fulfillment in it?
Yeah, well, I think you just bring up an interesting point. It's a human dynamic issue today, and it's largely due to the ability to consume information. And but the thing is, Todd, like and I bet you there's a lot of people on this call who listen to it will understand it too. If it's really not meaning anything to you, really on the back end, and you do a feedback loop where someone asks you, so how much did that really raise your awareness or bring things to a higher order for you. And if you're like, well, really not much, I can't even remember what that guy said a couple of weeks ago, then it really wasn't that important for you to search out that information. So I think, I can, it's very easy for me to say, but it's hard to do. I could tell you that you're really not missing anything. And I think that if people start to recognize and believe, in themselves, and they really get more fine-tuned focus on really trying to understand less, but with the understanding of those less things, they become really fucking good at it, you'll actually become more fulfilled. And then you'll start to recognize that you have your own unique thing that you have knowledge of and can grasp and hold on to. And that, again, coming back to my previous point, Todd, is I think I filtered that down to priorities, in my life that allow me to still have, the ability to read some books and to kind of stay, involved in some things. But could I, listen to all these other things that are happening? I sure could, but, that's just not, I think it, to me, in my mind, it says that's going to pull me away from doing the three things that I'm really fucking good at. And I guess it just comes down to every person and how they see that.
Sure. Yeah. There's an opportunity cost to everything you do. And if you start to become more comfortable with where you're spending it, then there can be less, I guess, head chatter and discomfort with what you're doing.
Yeah, because I think that if anything, I think the best thing each of us as individuals can offer to the world is to be the best of ourselves, the best thing that we can offer. And you'll fine tune it over time, because you'll start to recognize that you're going to want to pick on this one thing and these couple of things, and you really want to do a good job of it. And everyone around you will feel that. But, everyone around you will also feel that you're, wishy-washy or confused or, scattered if you're searching for all those pieces of information, because that's how you're going to come across to people. But, when people are really in their lane and they own it and they love it for the shit that they know and want to focus on, they crush it. They crush life in that area.
Sure. So with, say, CCP coaches who are basically saying, hey, I'm raising my hand, I want you to teach me how you do this stuff. What challenges do they have that you see in terms of trying to, like I said, learn the information, retain it, implement? What comes up that stops them from having success there?
Yeah, I think it just piggybacked on the thing we just talked about. There's just so much information that they believe the market makes them believe that they don't know. And what I try to do is just to try to put it into things that quote unquote make sense. And so I just try to teach the coach to look at all those things out there and to be able to just look at it go by and go, yep, that totally makes sense. Okay, next. Yep, that makes sense, because this is what I remember James talking about. Okay, yep, that's what he said was going to happen, and there it is, there it goes. So I'd like to, teach coaches about systems and organizing their thoughts and being aware of these simple things in fitness. And so I think that's the biggest thing that they have to overcome is people want to consume information at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but they're not retaining shit. And so what you're getting in the product is this lazy ass approach to fitness, because no one can think for themselves because they have 30 different voices in their head coming through to the market.
Sure. And something that I see too is it's not enough to basically learn something once. You learn it and then you try to do it, and then you have continued learning as soon as you attempt to integrate your idea with the real world. It's like, oh, I have this great marketing campaign, and then you run it and you're like, oh, that sucked. It doesn't mean the marketing campaign was fundamentally bad. It just means that you probably did it wrong. Like, okay, try it again. Figure it out. And so for you recently delegated most of your coaching role.
Uh-huh.
What did that look like for you? How did you come to that decision, and how have you gone through that process?
Yeah, well, I had an awesome career in coaching individuals. It was kind of a sad moment, to be honest. But I had to change my role within the business, as well as I had to accept this fact that our business and our coaches were not going to grow if I didn't create leadership in trying to duplicate myself and how I do what I do and how I love it. So I live through my coaches now in that coaching experience. So how the process went, well, When I make decisions on what we need to do, it's pretty much the Band-Aid approach. And then I just come up with, ways to figure out how to deal with it, kind of like getting rid of the training blog or changing our name. It's just like, okay, that's done. Now let's deal with it. Because I just don't like drama. I mean, it's like, why hum and haw over that shit if we know that's the right direction we need to go? So the direction we needed to go was, it's a massive economic hit too. I mean, my clients, we had like 95% retention of all my clients, but I moved 70 something clients over to all my coaches at a lower price point, but with still, awesome service, just so I could step up and obviously coach those coaches with clients, but also help lead the CCP and what we want to do in helping, educate coaches.
Sure. So very, very straightforward. Just said, okay, this is not my top priority anymore. It's taking too much of my time away from the stuff that is my priority. Maybe there's a little discomfort, but here we go. Rip it off. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. And you know what? Just like in every situation, I mean, it's all that shit that we have is in our head, and, so all the letters and emails that I got back were just so grateful for our relationships we built, and they were sad, but there was no one like, oh man, I fucking signed up for this, fuck you. I had none of that. Everyone was like, I'm so excited for you, I can't wait to see your business grow. I'm so happy that I'll be moving over and working with someone you've been training. And so I mean, it's all awesome. So the fears we have in our head are really stuff that we only design ourselves.
Sure. And similarly with your role now more focused on building the OPEX brand of coaches, right? Remote coaching, as well as the CCP. How do you attempt to separate you yourself from OPEX, or do you even try to do that?
Yeah, well, I think that's, for sure, Todd, because I think that has been our messaging since we really changed our name of, because OPT was my moniker, it was me. And I do, we have no regrets on, what I stand for personally or what's involved in the business. But it's just that, in order for us to really grow, I think it has to, I have to really learn, personally, but also within our business to create this culture, of a name that connects everyone and a name that's not a person. And I think that's what OPEX has done, is moving from OPT to OPEX. We've really tried to designate that, OPEX is really a certain way of living a larger life, and that happens through coaching or also coach to client online in the services we provide. And that's I think the message that we're trying to send over time, so that the market starts to understand exactly, what OPEX means. And if I'm still attached to that in that story, that's still good, but we definitely wanted to move it in that direction.
Sure. So in terms of attempting to market the business and get out there, what are your thoughts around that? I guess just trying to bring the message of OPEX and not just say, hey, I'm James FitzGerald, like, here's all the shit I learned from Ian King.
Yeah. Well, it's a long answer to, the marketing perspective, but I can talk in big pictures. It's no different than, I guess how marketing systems work. You really have to know, who's the audience that is going to consume your information and then buy your products. And then you just have to speak to them and offer solutions to their problems. And so there's multiple ways of doing that. OPEX is going to do a lot of awesome things over the next couple of years that we have plans to do. Some of those include licensing models. Some of those include, getting into some children's fitness programs, possibly, as to how that operates within innovative courses within the school curriculum. Obviously, online and remote coaching, and we want to certainly put a place in our market so people have a really quality, high standard place to go for online coaching for people who are serious about it. And I think that you just got to speak to those markets and really say that we can offer, the solutions to their problems. And we want to, I guess, really think about who's going to be the clients of the coaches we're teaching. I mean, that's really what goes on in CCP. And then for coach to client online, it's pretty simple. Obviously, you just market an online setting in terms of how to operate that. But I think to finalize that, it's really just trying to let people know out there that we're fitness. We're not CrossFit. We're not obstacle course racing. We're not Olympic lifting. I mean, that's our shtick is fitness. So we understand fitness. We understand it as best as anyone, and we just want to put our we want to be that spot that stays there when all the shit goes up and down. So these trends come in and out, and everyone has these models, and people try to do these, things, and we're just there. We're just there the whole time with good principles and fitness and coaching, and yeah.
Sure. So on a more granular level, then you're coming to Chicago in about a month to do some teaching on program design.
Yeah.
What is a potential coach going to get out of that? What problem is that going to solve for them if they come to that course?
Yeah, so I'll be able to answer, I'll be able to give you a really good idea as to why you're doing what you're doing. And I'll certainly give you some insights into what you currently are doing that is really effective and the reasons why it's effective. And just as well, I'll also tell you what you could be doing is also really ineffective in terms of designing programs. And so that's basically what people get out of program design. They leave with this holy shit, or this like, okay, that's really enlightening, because they feel like they're more competent, where they leave and say, I feel like at least I know why I'm prescribing what I'm prescribing. And that's basically what you'll get out of my program design course.
For sure. And then what about other stuff? You got, if people are interested in becoming a coached athlete, what do they do? What are they going to get out of that situation?
Yeah, so the getting coached online or a remote coaching process is really for a specific person who's really just has a pursuit of needing a coach that they don't have possibly geographically where they are, and they need a coach, and they're fairly competent. They're not broken. They can afford it, and they're serious about fitness. And if you fall into that category, then it's a free consultation to speak to Carrie at opexfit.com. And we're looking for people who want to develop a relationship in a remote setting so that you can go do your shit somewhere and enjoy your workout program. And we can get fulfilled by that because we get to teach and learn you how to progress.
Sure. James, thanks for taking the time and hanging out.
Yeah, always, man. I could do this with you whenever you want.
Yeah, for sure. We can just do we'll do an hourly Periscope live. Is that cool? Does that work with your schedule?
I like it. Yeah. Ironically, the last time we had talked was like almost a year ago to this day. How funny is that? I think we had a Skype call about something, but anyway.
Is that some like Rain Man shit, or did you actually look at your calendar?
I saw it come up on the fucking. I should have answered those. That's so weak. It's that. So weak. I could have been perceived in a total different light. I just thought about it.
Yeah.
No, I saw it come up on the Skype thing.
Yeah. How'd you come up with your models for program design? Well, I remember the exact date of every workout that I've done, as well as the exact time.
That was 827. Yep, push, press, and squats. 827.
Yep, and then I just regurgitated. There you go, simple as that. But no, thanks for taking the time. And then anything else that you want to mention, or places that people should go to learn more, resources you want folks to check out based upon this if they had a good time listening. What else you got for them?
OPEXfit.com. That's our website. I have a blog of some bi-weekly information, or twice a week. I have some information on there people may want to consume. Otherwise, in terms of message, just wake up. Wake up.
There you
become
go.
more aware. Become more conscious. Start thinking.
Simple as that.